A couple of things that I need to mention I forgot is I'm using Tight Bond 2 yellow wood glue. Any kind of yellow wood glue will do the job, but I like the Tight Bond 2. It's water resistant and it's good stuff, and it's not too expensive. The other thing is you need to make sure before you glue any of this stuff up or you cut any of it that your wood is dry, that it's well seasoned. If it's not, when you start getting these pieces and putting them together like this, as soon as they hit the dry air, they're going to start twist and warp, and they're going to shrink, and they'll shrink at different rates, and they just won't be accurate in probably 5 or 10 minutes. So I never trust the wood when I buy it. I always measure it with a moisture meter first, and I try to dry it myself. I store most of my wood in the attic. It gets good and hot and dry up, or it's almost like a kiln. But you need to make sure that your wood is dry. If it's not dry, don't even start. Okay, so I've taken several of these blocks after they're glued and set. There's 5 or 6 of them there. And these over here are only there as spacers to provide support for the clamping coming down here. Notice how pointer. These are lined up exactly square and vertical. Okay? And I've got these staggered at 1 block off on each one. So we're going to slice this later in this in this angle, so we don't want to waste material when we slice this off. But it's important. The most important part is that you get these vertical lines exactly lined up perfectly, and all the everything is square and lined up exactly right. And you don't, again, I don't want to use C-clamps on here. I just use these light clamps. I don't want a whole lot of clamping pressure. I don't want to distort the thing. Well, I'm still gluing up. And once you get one set like this glued together, actually this one's completed and glued together, and I've drawn some lines on it just to try to calculate how much I'll get. But you can use the other completed block, which this one's completed, it's all glued up, and I just glued these 2 outside ones together, and you can see that middle one is helping to support the other 2 that are being glued up. I've got all these blocks glued up, and now I'm ready to slice them off. I want to do it on a bandsaw, and your bandsaw needs to be set up right. Needs to be square, fence needs to be square, and you need a good sharp blade to keep it from wandering, because the grains are going to change in here, and I've got them marked where I want to slice them. So I'm going to go ahead and slice these, and then I'll be back. Okay, after slicing these pieces off, you end up with a bunch of pieces like this. They're a little rough, but that's okay. We're going to straighten those out and sand them on the thickness sander. But it's starting to look like some banding now. Okay, I've sanded these pieces through the thickness sander, so they're a little bit wider than they need to be. They're going to be in the end 5/8 of an inch or 0.625, and I've sanded them about 650. I leave about 25 thousandths over for any variations I might get up in my gluing. But anyway, I've got all these pieces all thickness sanded to the same. Now what I'm going to do, these are just dry fit, is these pieces, you can see they're the same. Anyway, I'm going to wax my table. I'm going to glue these down, and I'm probably use epoxy, and I spring clamp them, and it makes sure they fit tight. I get them up a little bit high, and then when I spring clamp it, I'll pull it down, it'll fit right in place. And then I'll let that cure, and then we'll sand them to the appropriate thickness. Okay, I've sanded this one with the thickness sander to 5/8 of an inch thick. And I've sanded these 2 pieces of maple, also 2 inches wide, to 3/16 inch thick. Actually, just a hair over 3/16, about a couple thousandths over. What I'm going to do is glue these on here, trim these up first, so they're 36 inches long. Then I'll glue these up, and that will be my banding, and then we'll slice it off. Now the key to all this is accuracy in cutting, just cutting square and cutting accurately. Make sure your 45s are 45, and that's it. Anyway, I'll show you how I'll glue these on there. This one's still setting up, and it needs to be sanded to 5/8 of an inch first. Okay, we're going to glue these edges on. Here I'm just using Titebond 2 yellow glue again. Just takes a little practice to figure out how much glue you're going to need. Make sure these don't slip on me. Get it tight. Once I get them in the caul and they slip, well, you're done. So I've got a little jig I've set up. I've got some big cauls here. Notice these cauls are covered with felt. It takes up any variation in the caul and also in the flat of this. And they're covered with wax paper, plain old cut-rate wax, I guess it's cut-rate wax paper. Keeps the glue, any glue squeeze, from sticking to the cauls and having your piece stick to it. Six clamps on here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Let that set for about an hour. Okay, I've taken it out of the cauls. I've trimmed the ends that I've made. Okay, I've taken the these loafs, I've called a loaf, out of the caul, and it's all glued up and set, and it's ready to be sliced into bands. Out of each one of these 2-inch wide loaves, I'll get about 18 to 20 pieces of banding. This is a small band saw that I have dedicated for slicing the bands, and I can slice off these bands at probably around 50 thousandths, 40 to 60 thousandths inch thick. 50 thousandths is about what I shoot for. You can see it's a homemade jig. Has a little feather board on it to keep the banding tight up against the fence, and has a very thin 1/4 inch blade, 6 teeth per inch, And this is an 18 thousandths thick blade, so the kerf is very small. So I don't want to bore you with the noise and how I do it, but we just run these through, slice them off one at a time. The bands come off this end, not on the fence side, and each time you saw one, you have to move the fence over so that it saws another one. So I've got 2 loaves that I've made, and I'll take a kerf off of each one, make a band, and then just continue until we saw the whole loaf up. So now I've sawed off 2 of these bands off of each one. These bands are they're pretty flexible because it's the grain is running this way, so it's bending on the cross cut portion of the grain pretty much. But the band itself shows the face grain of the wood. Anyway, turned out pretty good, and that's the way it's done.